This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanya.
And I'm Talia.
And we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hey Talia.
Hi Tanya.
How are you today?
Today's a great day. How are you?
Well, as you can probably tell, I'm sick.
Yes.
I'm getting over something, so please excuse my voice, everyone. I would like to welcome everyone back to another exciting episode. And today I'm going to tell you about a serial killer.
Oh, I love the serial killers.
But before I start the story, I would just like to remind everyone to hit the subscribe or follow button on whatever app you're listening to. And so our story takes place in South Los Angeles, California during the 1980s when there was a full-scale crack epidemic going on. Gang warfare was at an all-time high. There was constant violence that consumed the community. This was a really bad time for struggling and vulnerable women. A lot of them ended up being collateral damage. They were seen as easy targets since most were either addicted to crack or they turned to a life being a sex worker, or they were just struggling in general. So it didn't come as much of a surprise when there were lots of women that began showing up dead. Like their bodies would show up in dumpsters and dark alleyways. It almost seemed kind of normal during that time in that area of South LA, where lots of women just went missing. And it never seemed to make the press. It just seemed it would happen and nobody cared.
They were disposable.
Right. While a lot of these murders started in 1983, or so the police thought, the LAPD didn't make this information known to the public until September 1985. There was women disappearing. Now keep in mind, the police began to suspect there was a serial killer that had been preying on sex workers almost 6 months prior to alerting the public, by which time they knew that 7 women had been murdered.
7.
However, that number would eventually rise to a total of 17.
Damn.
With 13 of those victims being African American, 2 were Latino, and 2 were white women. It was around this time that the LA County Sheriff's Department and local police joined forces to set up a South Side Slayer task force, where they would begin investigating the murders. And I know we did an episode called the South Side Slayer.
Yes, we did.
And it's not about this killer, but he was operating in this area around the same time.
Damn.
Initially, police thought the murders were committed by one single person, who they said was the Southside Slayer. However, things got a little rocky during this time because detectives soon realized that there were several serial killers murdering women operating at the same time. So I'm sure it was really difficult for them to figure out which
victims
right.
with which killer.
Exactly.
That's fucked up.
Yeah, investigating it was really confusing. And it just made difficult work for the detectives. There were at least 6 other serial killers.
What?
Operating at this time.
What?
Yeah, I know, crazy. One was named Louis Crane. They figured out he did 2 of the killings. Ivan Hill, he was responsible for 1. Michael Hughes committed at least 1. Daniel Lee Siebert did at least 1. And Chester Turner, who was the subject of the episode we did, Southside Slayer, was responsible for at least 1.
I never heard of the other ones.
Me neither. But I'm sure we'll have future episodes, right? At one point, the serial killer that the detectives were looking for had committed a string of murders that were informally known as the Strawberry Murders. And strawberry is a slang for a woman who exchanges sex for drugs.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I didn't either. You learn something new every day on this podcast.
Yes, you do.
On August 10th, 1985, a woman's body was found in an alleyway in LA near Vermont Avenue and Gage Avenue. She had been there for days, and by the time she was found, her body was already very badly decomposed. She had been shot 3 times in the chest with a .25 caliber automatic handgun. When the detectives had the bullets recovered from the body, they didn't find any shell casings, it was just the bullet. Also, it appeared that her body had been dumped at the location, so she had been killed elsewhere. In one of the crime scene photos, all you can see is just like a zombie-looking hand. I mean, it was probably pale, and it was hanging out underneath a red carpet that had been laid over the top of her. Police were able to get fingerprints from her hand, and they identified her as 29-year-old Deborah Jackson. Unfortunately, though, her state of decomposition prevented the police from gathering anything else. As a result, there were no leads, no DNA, no anything else that they could find on her body.
How long do they think she was dead for?
I'm not sure, but it was August in LA, so it may have been a short time.
Right.
The following August 12, 1986, another woman's body was found in an alleyway underneath a green blanket with a gag stuffed in her mouth. She had been shot twice in the chest, also with a .25 caliber automatic. She was identified as 34-year-old Henrietta Wright. Again, no witnesses or DNA was available. The police were fairly certain that these murders were linked, but they didn't have a clue about the culprit's identity. This is something crazy. In 1987, a measly 2 years after the Southside Slayer Task Force had been put together, it was disbanded due to a lack of results that didn't make up for the amount of money that was going into the investigation. You know, they were getting little results, like little return for the money that the police were putting into it, or the manpower that was being used to keep it afloat. So it really came down to resources, which realistically shouldn't have been a factor, obviously, when trying to hunt down a serial killer, but they did. Task Force Commander Lieutenant John Zorn told the Los Angeles Times in December 1987 that, quote, the flow of clues is almost non-existent at this point, end quote. Police would follow up on any leads they had. The task force logged more than 4,800 tips, but it really brought them nowhere. To the African American community, the police doing this, it seemed to them like they were just giving up.
I mean, I could see that.
I can see that too. They began thinking law enforcement simply didn't care about them and had no desire to help them. The community thought that because the victims were minorities and the police weren't putting in any real effort into the investigation. They thought that if the crimes happened in a place like Beverly Hills, maybe when the victims were, white cheerleading high school students.
It would have been a different story.
Yeah, there would be really more pressure from the public to solve the cases. In retaliation of what was seen as bad police work and wanting to be a voice for the women in the Black community, activist Margaret Prescott, the founder of the Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Murder, she made a huge stink. She held organized protests, she held press conferences, she put on community outreach campaigns, and just so much more. There's video footage dating back to 1985 where she can be seen handing out flyers at a local grocery store concerning the man committing these murders.
Good for her.
I know. In the video, she can be heard telling locals that this man in question has been killing women for at least 3 years and saying there had to be more victims out there.
So they had a sketch?
No, they did not have a sketch. When Margot went down to the police station, she was outraged because numerous women had been murdered, and they didn't even alert the public. Like I told you, they weren't even going to the public about this. And the captain said to her, well, what are you concerned about? He's only killing hookers.
Oh, fuck. Oh, man. That's not politically correct.
No. I'm glad that maybe the attitude has changed a bit.
Yeah.
Over these past 30-some years. On January 10th, 1987, at 12:19 a.m., an anonymous caller placed a call to the LAPD Communication Division, and the call went like this. The caller said, quote, yes, I'd like to report a murder of a dead body or something. The address is 1346 East 56th Street in the alley. And the guy that dropped her off was driving a white and blue Dodge van with the license plate number, I give it. He threw her out. And the only thing that's hanging out, he threw a gas tank on top of her. And the only thing you can see out is her feet. It happened about 30 minutes ago, end quote.
Damn.
The dispatcher said, did you get a look at him? The caller says, no. And then the dispatcher asked, what is your name? And the caller said, oh, I'm staying anonymous. I know too many people. Okay then, bye-bye. And he hung up. So police do investigate this call, and they found a woman wrapped with the top half of her body in a trash bag. She was found under a gas tank in a pile of garbage with a shot through her chest. Detectives had the crime scene processed for evidence and took note of the tire track markings left behind in the alleyway where her body was dumped. The victim was 23-year-old Barbara Ware. The van was registered to the Cosmopolitan Church, which was about 4 miles away from the crime scene. When police arrived to the church, they found the van parked in the church parking lot, and they noticed that the hood was still warm to the touch. Of course, police had to find out who the driver of the van was. The people who were inside the church when the cops arrived said that the keys were pretty much accessible to whoever wanted or needed to use it. In fact, they claimed to have just used it earlier that day. Several church members were interviewed, but police ruled them out as having anything to do with the case. Gunshot residue tests were conducted, but didn't yield anything.
Well, they know it's somebody from the fucking church, right?
Or somebody that knows about the van being at the church. The van was impounded and processed for evidence, but they really didn't get anything out of it, and no blood was found in the van. After Barbara Ware's murder, there were 3 more murders. One on April 16, 1987, where 26-year-old Bernita Sparks was found shot once and left in a trash can behind a church with her shirt and pants unbuttoned and one shoe off. On November 1st, 1987, 26-year-old Mary Lowe was shot in the chest and beaten and found behind a large shrub in an alley with her pants unzipped and panties missing. On January 30th, 1988, 22-year-old Lucretia Jefferson was shot through the heart and found underneath a mattress in an alley. A napkin was covering her face and the word AIDS was written on it.
What?
I know, it's fucking weird. From these 3 women, sexual assault kits had been obtained, and those kits were sent to be analyzed for DNA. They found the same male DNA was on all 3 bodies, mainly their breasts, and they had no one that matched the DNA in their database. At this point now, police are more than positive that they had a serial killer on their hands, but they still didn't release this information to the public. The decision would end up being detrimental of not telling the public because the murders would continue, and a big reason was most likely because the women of South LA had no idea there was a clear and present danger on the streets. Police would later say that their silence was in part to protect the women and not alarm the community, but
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it sounds like bullshit, right? At this point, really the only evidence that the police had besides the DNA that matched no one were the bullets. They didn't have shell casings, though, or a murder weapon, and they did have the knowledge, though, that the victims were either sex workers or drug addicts, and they were all found within a 4-mile radius. They had all been strangled or shot, or both, raped, and left for dead, and there were never any witnesses.
So some were strangled?
I think they were either strangled or shot, or both, yeah. On September 6, 1988, 18-year-old Alicia Monique Alexander was found shot, strangled, almost completely nude, and stashed under a blue foam mattress in an alley. Her father would later say that she had left to go to the store, make a quick stop, but she never came back. A couple of young boys playing in the alleyway noticed a foot sticking out from under a mattress. She had been there for a few days already, so decomp had already started to set in. In this case, though, there was one witness. The witness saw Monique earlier that day exiting a liquor store and getting into an orange car. You would think orange would be easy to find.
Yeah, orange car. There's not that many orange cars now.
No. Police were convinced that the driver of this vehicle was the man that they were looking for and that he was killing his victims in the car, which would explain why they weren't finding any bullet casings at the scene of the crimes. They were thinking the bullets casings were still in the car. On November 19th, 1988, so just 2 months later, 38-year-old Anitria Washington retold her story to the police of how she was shot and left for dead. She recalled that it was a Saturday, around 4 or 5 p.m. She had just gotten off of work and was on her way to a friend's house so they could attend a party together. She was walking past a liquor store when she noticed an orange Ford Pinto that was out in front of the store that was quote-unquote pimped out.
Oh.
And had white racing stripes on it. A pimped out Pinto.
Okay. All right.
And did you know, I don't know if you noticed, but there was a discussion in our Patreon where they were saying, do all creepers drive Pintos?
Yes. The answer is yes.
And did everybody that had a Pinto, were they a creeper? My mom had one, so no, not everyone.
Okay.
But the guy that owned the Pinto noticed that Anitria was looking at his car, and he asked if he could give her a ride. She refused, saying that she's going to a friend's house and they had plans to go out. He said, quote, "That's what's wrong with you black women. Nobody can ever be nice to you," end quote. And she was taken aback by this statement. She's probably like, what the fuck, dude?
What the hell?
God, I just said no.
I don't want to get in your Pinto.
I know, I don't want to get in your car, damn. Anitria figured that since her destination was just around the corner, and if this guy giving her the ride could keep from having his feelings hurt, then okay, fine. I'll let him take me to the party. So she got into his car. The ride started out pretty well, with conversation flowing, and she remembered the guy wasn't putting any real red flags up, so he made her feel a little more at ease in terms of getting into his car, like he's a stranger. He told her he had to stop at his uncle's house on 81st Street and pick up some money. So he did that. He got out, went to the house, and he got back in the car, and then he made a left turn instead of going straight, which is the way that she needed him to do. She said as soon as he turned the corner, it was as if he snapped and changed into an entirely different person, a much scarier person. He started calling her by someone else's name, which was confusing for her because she said he was acting like delusional. Apparently, he was on some kind of crazy rant, and she knew immediately, I gotta get the fuck out of this car.
I wonder if he was doing drugs in that house or something that made him snap.
Yeah, right? She said he completely, his personality changed. They started arguing, and then suddenly he shot her in the chest, although she didn't realize it at the time. I'm thinking it must not have made a very big noise, and she didn't feel, the bullet. She was so focused on their argument and trying to get out of the car that her adrenaline just must have been pumping.
Yeah.
At 1,000,000,000% for her brain not to immediately register that kind of pain. I'm sure she was scared also. She reached for the door, and he told her that if she opened the door, he was going to shoot her again. That's when she realized he had shot her.
Shit.
I know.
Be reaching for the door still.
Fucking A, I know, right?
I mean, if he's already shot me, what's he going to do with me if I stay in the car?
Yeah, right?
Buy me roses? I don't think so.
I don't think so. She tried to get him to take her to the hospital, but he looked at her like she was crazy, and he said, no, I can't do that. That's going to get me caught. And she said she nodded out at this point, passed out, and she awoke again to flashes of light, which turned out to be him taking pictures of her. She remembers passing out again and waking up to him being on top of her. She knew then that he was raping her. Then she started to feel the pain of the shot because it was as if someone was crushing her. And so she told him, get off. As soon as he started driving again, though, she tried for the door once more to see if she could get out. Most likely thinking this woman was done for, the man pushed her at the same time she tried for the door, and she rolled out of the car onto the street. He never came back for her.
Wow.
Yeah, he just left her for dead. She said she remembers a voice telling her to get up, and she did. Disoriented, she made her way to her friend's house, where she laid on the front porch until her friend eventually pulled up into the driveway. She screamed for her to call 911, and Anitria was taken to the hospital. She said she woke up underneath a sheet naked, and literally her first thought was that she was dead. She had a tube stuck in her side to drain the blood out of her lungs, and the doctor told her that her rib cage helped to deflect the bullet because the entrance wound was right by her heart.
Wow.
So thankfully. Police, when they investigated, realized she had been shot with a .25 automatic, which was the same as their other victims. When Anitria was released from the hospital, she worked side by side with police to create a composite sketch of her attacker.
It shouldn't be hard now to find somebody with a
orange Pinto.
Pimped out.
Yeah, now that they have a composite. From her description, police knew they were looking for an African-American male in his early 30s who was well-spoken, clean-shaven. He dressed very neat and tidy. She described him as looking kind of geeky. He was wearing a black polo shirt, which was tucked into his khaki pants. He added that she knew he was on the shorter side in terms of his height because she distinctly remembered that she stood taller than him in her tennis shoes. After police talked to her, they had at least 50 police officers conducting surveillances in LA, and they were even doing routine traffic stops. They went looking for an orange Pinto in the neighborhood where Anitria said she was. The search, though, went on for weeks, and nothing came of it.
Can't they, look in a database for an orange Pinto?
How many could there fucking be?
I don't know. It can't be many.
Can't be that many. It's not like you're looking for a black one or a white one or something. Girl, I don't know. The detectives had no idea what happened to the vehicle. And remember that composite sketch I told you about?
Yeah.
That ended up not getting released to the public until 2009.
What?
Yeah, it never got released when Anitria gave the police her description of her attacker. When law enforcement was asked later, why wasn't the sketch released sooner? Their excuse was that eyewitness sketches aren't often reliable.
Okay.
But they fucking do it all the time.
I know. All right. Well, whatever. Maybe it would help, though.
Maybe it would. Exactly.
Come on.
It was almost 20 years after she was attacked they released it.
That pisses me off.
And I'm not trying to give you a spoiler alert, but he doesn't get caught right away. On February 23rd, 1989, an LA County sheriff was caught talking to a sex worker in a car, and he was caught by the LAPD. His name was Ricky Ross. He was heavily intoxicated, and the girl in the car with him had said that they had been smoking crack together. He denied these allegations and told the officer he had only been drinking a little bit, and that since he was a cop, the officer should let him go. However, the girl in the car told the officer that she was afraid of Ross and told police he had a gun in his trunk. When they checked the trunk, they found drugs and a 9mm Beretta semi-automatic pistol. So Ross was promptly arrested. When the gun was tested, it came back as a match to bullets from 3 murders of 3 women shot with a 9mm Beretta. This gun wasn't Ross's service revolver, but was his personal gun. Police continued the investigation to see if he was connected with more murders, and when police searched his home, they found a .25 caliber holster, but they didn't find the gun that went with it. This led police to believe he probably wasn't responsible for the .25 caliber murders, but I don't know why.
Why?
Right?
He's got a holster, but
yeah.
I don't know much about that.
I know. During his trial, independent forensic analysis was conducted by 2 experts who both found it unlikely that Ross's gun was the murder weapon, like 9mm Beretta, and he was released. All 3 of those murders remain unsolved.
He was acquitted?
Yep. And when he was exonerated, he walked away with every cop pretty much thinking he was the .25 caliber murderer. So he kind of disappeared for a while. And coincidentally, the killings stopped in 1989. As a result, officers closed the case boxes and moved on from the investigation because it just grew cold.
Yeah.
And before I tell you more, we're going to take a break. So as I mentioned, these killings stopped. And so our killer was laying low, especially after Anitria survived. Probably he got spooked, like, oh shit. Right? However, 13 years later, in late 2001, 15-year-old Princess Berthomew went missing in South Central LA. What's really sad about this case is that this girl was horribly abused at a young age by her biological parents. And then she was taken away from them, and she was brought up in foster care before she found her forever family. But that family wouldn't be forever. After her new mother died, her adoptive mother, she was separated from her siblings and sent to South Central LA to live with other relatives.
That's sad.
It's very sad. She had run away a few times already, and the last time was in December 2001, just before her body was found, March 19th, 2002. She was found strangled, naked, and hidden in a bush in an alley. Princess's death prompted the police to look at the 911 call that was made. Remember I told you about that one from years prior?
The anonymous?
Yeah, it was never released to the public. They thought, well, that didn't make sense. They thought the caller was the killer. The alleyway where Princess was found had no lights, and it was pitch black. And remember, it was a van from that church?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you took a look at the van, the license plate was covered by a ladder on the back. Unless you were really close, you wouldn't have been able to see the license plate. So the caller to them seemed like he had to be involved in the murder. Like, he had so many details, right? But not too much came of that. A year later, on July 11, 2003, 35-year-old Valerie McCorvey's body was found in a roadway adjacent to an alley. She was partially clothed with her breasts exposed and ligature marks on her neck showing she had been strangled. The DNA found on her body was not only linked to Princess, but it was also to the murders from the 80s. Yeah. That's when police realized that their murderer was back.
Is that why they call him the Grim Sleeper?
The Grim Sleeper, yeah, I think so. And they're like, fuck, we got to catch this guy. Now you have to understand, at this time, they have this unknown killer who's ravaging poor black neighborhoods, and nobody in the public knows. that this killer is on the loose and has been on the loose for many years at this point. I mean, not even the families of the victims. Police told them shit. The police finally decided to put a new task force together to further investigate these murders.
And what year is this?
This is 2003.
Wow.
They finally put this task force together. And they're like, okay, we got to find this guy. So a couple years later, on January 1st, 2007, and they're not getting many, just to defend the police, they're not getting many tips. They're not getting much evidence off of the victims. So it is making their job very difficult.
But they had DNA.
I know, they had DNA. On January 1st, 2007, 25-year-old Janicia Peters was found murdered. She had been shot in the lower back, which the coroner believes paralyzed her. She was probably still alive when she was placed in a trash bag and put inside of a trash bin and zip-tied closed.
Oh.
I know, that must have been terrifying. The coroner believed she was asphyxiated and that was her cause of death. Although the police didn't find any DNA on the body, they did find some on the zip tie, which must have been put in the killer's mouth when he was tying up the trash bag. Coincidentally, she was found in the same alley Bernita Sparks' body was found 20 years earlier. So Janicia, her body was linked through DNA to 11, possibly 12 unsolved murders in LA, the first which occurred in 1985.
That's crazy.
I know. Finally, this task force, which was called the 800 Task Force, that consisted of 7 detectives. I'll tell you a little bit about it. One of the detectives was Cliff Shepard, who I don't know if you remember, but he worked the cold case unit, and we talked about him in one of our previous episodes, the Jane Doe 59 story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He's been responsible for uncovering some of the biggest cold cases to date, more than any other detective on the LAPD. There was an investigative reporter who worked for the LA Weekly. She decided she was going to do some investigating of her own because she got wind of some of these murders and, that this was a cold case. She discovered many interesting things, but one thing that really stood out was that when she originally started investigating the story, she went to the LA County Medical Examiner's office to talk to the coroner. The coroner told her he had seen quite a few bodies dumped between 2002 and 2006. A lot of women were found dead in alleyways, dumpsters, etc. So she asked for the list, and he said, no, I'm not going to give you that. And he told her to leave and instructed her not to tell anyone about this, but she's an investigative reporter.
Right.
After a 4-month investigation that she conducted, she published her findings in the LA Weekly, which created a huge amount of controversy. In her article, she broke the news of the secret 800 Task Force, the linking of Janicia Peters' killing to a string of murders from 23 years earlier, as well as the fact that the mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa, and police chief William Bratton had kept quiet about the killer's existence. She also coined the term Grim Sleeper, and as you mentioned a little bit earlier, since the killer took a hiatus from his killing in the 80s to come back so long and then start killing again.
Yeah, which is weird.
Sadly enough, because the police kept this information under wraps and never held an official press conference regarding the killings, the story in the paper ended up being the first time families were informed their daughters had long been confirmed as victims of a serial killer.
That's just
you find it from the paper?
That's crazy. That's fucked up.
This obviously made the LAPD look bad and relatively a bit careless. So this kind of lit a much-needed fire under their ass. In early September 2008, the LAPD announced they were offering a $500,000 reward to help catch the killer.
Damn, that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. They also included Anitria's sketch from 1988, as well as 2 more computer-generated depictions of what he could possibly look like now in 2008. They also released the 911 call to see if maybe someone would be able to identify the voice on the tape. The victims' families were pissed, though. One of the mothers called the station and laid into the officers. She said she didn't want to learn new information on television and that the police should be respectfully reaching out to victims' families directly.
That's true.
I know. And the officer that she talked to had the audacity to tell her, well, I thought you already knew all this.
What?
I know.
How?
I don't. Exactly. How? On November 1st, 2008, the case was featured on America's Most Wanted. I used to love that show.
Oh, yes.
It was a must-see TV. On February 25th, 2009, so a few months later, the police chief addressed the press for the first time regarding the case, at which time the police formally gave the killer the Grim Sleeper nickname. Even with all of this new media hype, publicity, and reaching out to the public, it still didn't bring investigators any closer to catching their guy. That is, until new technology was introduced called familial DNA.
Oh, yes.
That's caught quite a few people.
And is still happening.
Mm-hmm. Thank God for those databases, right? In this case, the computer program was designed to allow police to run a DNA profile through an offender database and have it linked to other people that don't necessarily have to be an exact match. You know how it works.
Yeah.
They can just come close. So if the person they're looking for is a relative in the offender database, they can be tracked backwards. And this has become controversial because obviously these databases weren't designed to be used this way. And some people may consider it a violation of privacy, but I really have no problem with it.
Get over it.
I know.
It helps catch a killer.
Amen.
Serial killer.
I know, right? I mean, I don't have a problem.
Saves a life. Come on, life. Come on.
On July 2nd,
don't clone me.
Yeah, just don't clone me. Exactly. On July 2nd, 2010, detectives found a familial match of a man named Christopher Franklin, who had been arrested in 2009 for a weapons possession charge. But Christopher was too young
to be the Grim Reaper?
To be the Grim Sleeper. It proved that a male relative then had to be the man they were looking for. They honed in on Christopher's father, 57-year-old Lonnie Franklin Jr., who lived on West 81st Street, the same street that was mentioned in survivor Anitria's witness statement 22 years earlier. Remember, she said they stopped at 81st Street. When he stopped in the house to grab something, like he told her, it was actually his own house.
Oh.
Now police believe he wasn't stopping to pick up money, but to instead pick up his gun. So I'll give you a little background on Lonnie. Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was born on August 30th, 1952. He grew up in South Central LA in a predominantly black neighborhood, living in a community that statistically only allowed for about 50% of its local people to graduate high school. He lived with his parents in a bright green house that had bars on every window, just like every other house in the neighborhood. The neighborhood was dangerous back then, and it still is today. Today, Lonnie's son Christopher still lives in the same house, although it's no longer green. As a child, Lonnie often suffered migraines and struggled academically. Apparently, he wasn't the brightest boy, and for a long time, he could barely read or write. However, he did have some skills, one of which developed when he was around 7 years old. His father allowed him to drive one day, which brought life to his extreme obsession with cars. He discovered he was good with cars and working with his hands, and this skill gave him not just an occupation, but also an identity. It allowed him to really fully develop his social skills and his effortless ease when it came to talking to people. This is where his charm came from, especially with women. He knew how to make women like him, and he found he was quite popular with the ladies, which he would later use for evil. At age 16, he was taken into custody twice for grand theft auto, and the following year, he was arrested for burglary. By spring of 1974, 21-year-old Lonnie enlisted in the U.S. Army. He was stationed in Stuttgart, West Germany, where he worked as a cook. Late at night on April 16, 1974, Lonnie and 2 other servicemen decided they were going to find a girl to rape.
Oh.
Why not?
Okay. Well, should we go to the movies?
Yeah.
Or go, I don't know, find a girl to rape. What the hell is this shit?
I know. Who does this? At first, they tried to drag a young woman into their car, but they failed. She got away. However, just an hour later, they came upon a teenage girl who they stopped and asked for directions. Then they offered her a ride. When she accepted, they put a knife to her throat, drove to a field, and repeatedly raped her. She was able to make Lonnie believe that she actually liked him and asked for his number. He called her the next day, and when they set up a place to meet, the police circled in on him.
What an idiot.
I know, what a dumb fuck, right?
What the hell is wrong with people?
Hey, wink, wink. I really like you.
Yeah.
Can I give you my number? What?
Yeah, let me call you tomorrow.
During the gang rape, photographs were taken by all of the men, which Lonnie would later adopt in his own killings. He was convicted of rape, kidnapping, and attempted kidnapping. He was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison, As a result, he was dishonorably discharged from the U.S. Army. He only served some of that time, the prison time, while in Germany before he was sent back to the U.S., where he finished out the rest of his sentence. But even then, he still didn't end up serving his entire sentence like the 2 other men did. I'm not sure why. After being released from prison in May 1976, Lonnie returned to LA, his old stomping grounds. But this time, he returned as the perfect family man. He had met and quickly married his Belizean wife, Sylvia Franklin, who was an avid churchgoer. She worked in the school superintendent's office and was well respected in the community for more than 30 years. Together, they started a family and had a boy and a girl, Christopher and Crystal. From the outside looking in, Lonnie's life looked pretty normal, boring even. I kid you not, every person who was interviewed from either his family, friends group, or even the community itself described him as super nice. He was a really approachable guy who didn't draw too much attention to himself, and he was always around the neighborhood. Most of them described him as the best kind of neighbor to have. He was always willing to help and always around when you needed him. But of course, things are not as they seem. In the documentary Tales of a Grim Sleeper, all of his closest friends gave more insight into his personal life and the kind of man he really was. They also aired out a bit of dirty laundry in the process. 2 of his best friends discussed the odds of whether or not his wife actually knew what Lonnie had been up to the whole time. I mean, they lived together, right? His friends couldn't believe that she didn't know, but then again, her Bible thumper mentality kept her from really poking and prodding, I think, much into his life. His friends specifically talked about how the garage was Lonnie's domain and that his wife never went in there, and she also never went in the backyard. If and when she left the house, she would always leave out the front door and came back to the house the exact same way. It was almost as if she went out of her way to stay out of his business and whatever it was that he had going on, even though it was her house too. They also remarked that Lonnie and his wife were never together, and never once did either of them see the couple in the same car together. It just was odd. People speculated they slept in separate beds as well. There was even talk that she didn't always live with him, and if that's the case, then you can kind of see how he could get away with whatever he was doing. Oddly enough, because of his love of cars, he became a garage attendant for the LAPD.
Oh.
But that didn't last too long. In 1982, he started working in the sanitation department as a garbage man. He had pretty much been living a double life for 25 years and hiding in plain sight. Now that police knew of Lonnie, they were able to look him up, and they learned that he had been arrested in 1989 and convicted of 2 charges of theft, 1 charge of misdemeanor assault, and 1 charge of battery. However, he only ended up serving time for 1 of the theft charges, and his DNA was never taken. Evidently, at that time, the law only allowed for registered sex offenders to have their DNA collected and put into the database. So he could have been caught long before.
Wow.
His job as a garbage collector had given him some insight into the more hidden areas in LA.
Oh, yeah.
Such as back alleys and whatever. Not to mention the landfills and the dumps. This knowledge was useful to him in terms of maybe disposing of bodies. The LAPD immediately placed him under surveillance once they figured out who he was. One night he was seen driving up and down Western Avenue, and they watched him talking to various women throughout this journey up and down the road. They were afraid he was going to try and kill again, so a patrol vehicle was actually instructed to drive up on him, shine a light, and tell him to move on. They weren't going to have another murder happen right under their noses. They knew they needed to secretly obtain a piece of DNA evidence from him because the familial match from the database alone wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. So he went to a place called John's Incredible Pizza. I wonder if the pizza is incredible.
I don't know, but it sounds like it's delicious.
He went there on July 5th, 2010 for a child's birthday party. And one surveillance team, the members of that team disguised themselves as busboys for the restaurant.
Oh, clever.
So after cleaning up Lonnie's trash, they collected his fork, a drinking glass, a napkin, and a piece of pizza, which they brought back to the lab to be analyzed. They knew it would take a few days for the results to come back, so they kept Lonnie under surveillance while they waited for the results. The police were elated to discover that the DNA did in fact match none other than the Grim Sleeper, aka their .25 caliber murderer that they'd been searching for nearly 3 decades now. On July 7th, Lonnie was outside watering his plants at his house when police approached him with a warrant for his arrest. Surprisingly enough, he was very calm, almost oddly so. Police said he didn't ask what he was in trouble for or why they wanted to bring him to the police station.
I mean, I think he knows.
Yeah, he didn't give them any back talk, no reaction, which kind of threw them off. So they're like, what the hell's going on with this guy? During questioning, he denied knowing any of the women. He claimed he knew a lot of people, which was the exact same phrasing used in that 911 call. Which really piqued their interest. They're like, Investigators said it was as if his soul was dead and there was nothing there. He looked at pictures of each victim like they were nothing. Even after police told him his DNA was found on the bodies, he still claimed total innocence. During the interrogation, one of the detectives told Lonnie straight up that the police were absolutely convinced he was the Grim Sleeper, but that didn't even rattle him. They were certain he was lying to them, but it didn't matter that he didn't admit anything. They took him into custody. LAPD conducted a search of Lonnie's home, which lasted for 3 days and produced what police said was a quarter of a century's worth of evidence. Evidently, there was crap everywhere, and the house was borderline hoarder-like. The sheer volume of the evidence found in the home, garage, and vehicles forced police to set up tents on the lawn in Lonnie's front yard just so they could adequately sort everything out to make sure that it was properly accounted for and documented. The search proved to be a real challenge for them, but they ended up finding 800 items of evidence.
What the hell did they find?
Oh my God. They found a shitload of porn.
Oh, I'm sure.
Pictures, magazines, videos, etc. They found cameras. They found 25 automatic pack of bullets, a few different cell phones, cassette tapes, cash, credit cards, pills, prescription pill bottles, women's underwear, pornographic video footage of an unknown woman, and more than 1,000 pictures of different unidentified women. One of which was survivor Anitria. After she had been shot. In the picture, she can be seen lying back in the passenger seat of a car with a gunshot wound in her chest and her shirt covered in blood, and she appears to be unconscious. This picture alone corroborates her original witness statement, which was huge for the investigation. The police held a press conference and released the photographs of the women to the public. Some were naked, some partially naked, some seemed drugged, unconscious, or dead. Police wanted to know who these women were, if they were victims of the Grim Sleeper, or if they just knew anything that could help further the investigation. Police were able to identify most of the women they found in the photographs, but now they were left with maybe only about 180 unidentified women, as opposed to 1,000. Police believe there were more likely many more Grim Sleeper victims out there that they just didn't get lucky enough to recover pictures of. Lonnie's trial began in February of 2016, so it was relatively not that long ago. During the trial, a new story was brought to light that hadn't been really publicized anywhere. A 21-year-old woman by the name of Laura Moore was approached by a man while she was waiting at a bus stop in the spring of 1984. He offered her a warning. Quote, "You shouldn't be out here alone. Bad guys will pick you up," he told her. "Let me take you where you want to go." End quote. Although Laura was somewhat reluctant to accept his offer, she still ended up agreeing and got into his car with him. As the man drove off, he told her to put on her seatbelt. When she said no, he reached under the seat, grabbed a gun, and shot her 6 times.
Damn.
I know. Even though she was badly wounded, she still managed to escape somehow, but not before turning back to get a good look at his face. That man, Moore testified to, was without a doubt Lonnie Franklin Jr. As if that wasn't enough for the jury, Anitria took the stand to face her almost killer once again. She told the heartbreaking story of what had happened to her on that fateful night back in 1988. Lonnie's trial was an emotional, messy one, to say the least. On the day of sentencing, the victims' families were able to confront Lonnie face-to-face and say whatever it was they needed to get off their chest, whether it was for closure or just to rip him a new asshole for his incredulous actions. He showed not a single ounce of emotion as each person pleaded with him to explain why he had done the things he had done to these innocent women who did nothing wrong to him. A few times while looking directly into his eyes, he would mouth the words, "I didn't do it." Another time he can be seen nodding his head and looking down as if feeling badly, but I'm sure it was all an act.
Yeah, it's a bunch of bullshit.
I know. Regardless, Ronnie never confessed or pled guilty, and he definitely never explained why he did what he did. So I don't think those families will ever get the closure they fully want. On May 5th, 2016, after nearly 3 months of trial and a day and a half of jury deliberation, Lonnie was convicted on 10 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. A week later, on May 12th, during his sentencing hearing, prosecutors presented new evidence regarding 4 other victims they believed were killed by Lonnie. The following victims weren't identified until he'd already been arrested. 3 victims, Sharon Alicia Dismuke, Inez Warren, and Georgia Mae Thompson, were identified as likely victims by the task force officers investigating unsolved missing persons and homicide reports, which dated all the way back to 1976. The 4th, Rolenia Morris, was identified from evidence found in Lonnie's garage. Unclear on the actual evidence, but either way, I'm not sure what the actual evidence was, but either way, her body has never been found.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the only reason why the prosecutors didn't add these murders to the trial was in fear of it being delayed even longer than it already had been. On June 6, 2016, the jury sentenced Lonnie to death.
2016.
Yeah, shit. Finally, on August 10th, Judge Kathleen Kennedy handed down the sentence to Lonnie. 10 counts of murder, along with 1 count of attempted murder, with each guilty verdict per woman murdered. The judge read the names of each individual victim. Something along the lines of, quote, "In the case of Deborah Jackson, murder in the first degree, the jury finds you guilty." And she ended each time with, "You shall suffer the death penalty." I'm sure it was quite emotional.
Yeah.
Right before the trial concluded, the judge left Lonnie and the court with the following words. Quote, "There can be no justification for what you've done because what you've done is not justifiable under the laws of God, or the laws of man. Lonnie Franklin, it is the judgment of this court that you shall suffer the death penalty. It is not vengeance, it's justice, Mr. Franklin." End quote. She slammed her gavel, and the courtroom erupted in applause as he was taken away. In case you're wondering where Mr. Franklin is today, on March 28, 2020, 67-year-old Lonnie was found unresponsive in his cell in the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation prison. An autopsy was performed to determine the cause of death, but it was reported that there were no signs of trauma, and it was believed that he died of natural causes.
Only 4 years later?
Yes, only 4 years later, unfortunately.
God damn.
I know. Too bad he didn't suffer longer. Sorry. I'm in it for the vengeance.
Oh, man. No, he's bad.
Yeah, he's bad. I always get bummed out. Like, I'm glad they caught him.
Yeah.
Right? But I always get bummed out that he didn't just rot away in jail for 20 more years. And
I just can't believe he got away with it for so long. And there's probably so much more we don't even know.
Oh, I'm sure there's more victims than we know of.
He just killed and raped and killed.
Yes. And the police never said shit about it for a very long time. Anyway, that is my horrendous story.
That's just crazy, but it was really interesting.
Thank you. And if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe or follow button on whatever app you're listening to. It helps us out a lot.
That'd be awesome.
And if you would like to see pictures of this piece of shit or of the victims, you can go to our website,
crimesandconsequences.com, in case you needed some help with that.
Thank you. I almost said TNT.
Nope.
Where's my brain today? And also on our website, you can find links to merch if you're interested.
Yeah.
We should be releasing our holiday collection soon.
Oh, yeah.
We got to get those back out on the website. You can also find information about becoming a Patreon member. And what that means is we have a Patreon. You can find it at patreon.com/TNTcrimes, where you can get additional unreleased episodes. We release one a week.
Plus these episodes ad-free and early.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And you can also find the same episodes that are on Patreon if you listen through the Apple app. You can become an Apple subscriber, and you get the same episodes.
Absolutely.
And you get them early release and ad-free there, too.
Yep. That's right. That's correct.
You can find us on social media, on Facebook and Instagram at Hardcore True Crime. And I think that's everything.
Do we have any shout-outs?
We do have shout-outs.
Oh, let's do it.
I would like to thank Pat C. Shaylin, Michelle B., Nias. It's Nais, so I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. Niece. Ariel D. Snowflakes. Donna F. Gina T, Alistair A, Cheyenne B, Susie Q.
Susie Q?
Isn't that cute?
That's adorable.
Alejandra P, Golden M, Alex M, Andrea L, Jody G, Rebecca G, Monique H, Naomi G, Natalie T, Savannah S, Kimberly H, Iris M, Erica H, and Elizabeth V.
Thank you guys. You're the best.
You guys are awesome.
You guys and all of our continued loyal fans and everybody listening.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
So I think that's everything.
Well, that's good enough for me.
All right. Until our next episode.
Don't kill each other.
Bye.
Bye.